Hey, everybody, and welcome to Notes from the Underground. This is a podcast for people who love Jesus but have some real questions for Christianity. Here at Notes, we take a microscope to some of Christianity's thornier topics and people using a progressive theological lens and a socio-historical approach to studying the Bible. So if that sounds like you, come on in and have a seat. But buckle up, it might get bumpy. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Notes from the Underground. This is a podcast where we take a microscope to some of Christianity's thornier topics and people, and I'm your host, Tiziana Mom So Hard Source.
How you momming so hard today?
You know what? If you don't like that dinner, you can have some cereal. I'm not making you a second meal.
That's not a threat for somebody like me. Like, I love cereal, man.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so do my kids. You know, that voice you're hearing is coming from the right. That is Rick, the Podfather Welch.
Hey, so glad to be here.
Yeah, and then behind the glass we have Rocket Man Andy Bishop. The cow. Well, folks, if you're listening to this episode, you might be new to Notes from the Underground. I'm going to pin this episode at the very top. I figured this would be a good time to sort of introduce Rick and introduce Andy. If you've come to this podcast, you might be familiar with me via my TikTok, via my Instagram, via my blog, but you probably aren't as familiar with these folks. So we're going to have a chit chat about Notes, about how Notes came to be, and about our sibling podcast, The Burrows of Berea. Mm-hmm. So you can also check that website out and listen to those episodes. So yeah, that's where we're going to start today, I think.
So did you is it My Boyfriend's Ex-Girlfriend?
That used to be, yeah. So
did you change the name?
Yeah.
I loved the name of that podcast because it really got me interested, and I started reading. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that blog.
Oh yeah.
Her blog is incredible.
Yeah, I might keep it that.
So
I'm
raw
kind
and
of like,
honest.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like at this juncture, you know, I'm in like a bit of a rebuilding mode. So I need to get a new website. I want to like connect my blog to it, you know. But yeah, I did My Boyfriend's Ex-Girlfriend. I started blogging in 2020. And I started blogging it. And that initial episode, that first podcast, or boop, ba-doop, boop.
Yeah.
The first blog, that's a true story. It was because of
I know. That's
the
what was so great
relationship.
about it.
Yes, because of the relationship
How you
that I
became
have.
a friend with your
with my boyfriend's ex-girlfriend. Yeah. And at the time, of course, Dylan and I were just dating.
Yeah.
And so
Are you still friends with her?
Yeah.
And you're married to the man?
Yeah.
See how it works out?
She comes over for dinner.
See how it works out?
Yeah, she's a lovely human being.
That's awesome.
We want to get matching tattoos. I'm dead serious. I'm like not even playing.
I believe you.
But that's also kind of like and that's the point of that particular blogcast. I cannot get it straight. Coining a new word.
Blogcasting.
That particular blog, right, is about the beauty of relationships and about the beauty of relationships when they include a love for God.
Yeah.
And a willingness to love the way that God loves. And
that's
you know,
powerful. I love it.
And there was when her and I first became friends, there was a lot of people that were like, you know, you got to get that girl out of there.
Yeah.
You don't want that woman in your life. And my sister, I have several sisters. My older sister looked at me and said, he done mowed that grass.
Oh, God.
He don't want it, or whatever, or something like that. You know what I mean? Just basically like if he wants that again, he already knows what it is. So he'll go back to it and it has nothing to do with you.
It has nothing to do with you.
Yeah. And so, and so I about died. That was funny.
Awesome. That's funny.
Funny way of saying it. So, but yeah, so she's lovely. I mean, it is a little bit strange every now and again. See, this is interesting
Don't
because
change the title. That is a great.
It's a great title, but this is what's a lot of fun. So this is a Bible study podcast. Mm-hmm. I am a Christian. I am a practicing, self-proclaimed Christian. Rick.
I am a practicing, self-proclaimed Christian.
So we come to this podcast.
Andy.
I'm an absurdist.
Yeah.
A practicing self-proclaimed absurdist.
Yeah. Andy is neither. Yeah. Andy's on his own island.
Absurdism's a thing. You can Google it.
Oh,
It
good.
is.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's an absurdist.
It doesn't
I didn't
mean
know
absurdity.
that.
It means something else.
All right. So Andy's an absurdist, and I'm hoping, my desire is that other Christians, will listen to this podcast, Christians that are like me, Christians that are like Rick, Christians that are interested in exploring the Bible beyond Sunday morning, Christians that are interested in digging deeper into this text and into the extra biblical texts that help explain the biblical texts.
Yeah.
Because they're more interested in walking that walk in a real and abiding way outside of the pews, right? They don't want to the people that are interested in wearing the cross because they actually want to embody it, not because they're going to, someone was telling me the other day, this person's not even a Christian. And they were at the supermarket and the supermarket girl rang something twice and then was like, oh, sorry, whoops, and went to get a manager to undo it. And this woman just starts ripping her up one side and down the other. So bad, she almost started crying. And my friend who told me this story was standing behind her, not a Christian. And she was like, excuse me, but she apologized, and all you're doing is making her feel really terrible because it makes you feel good somehow. You are ruining her day. You're ruining my day. And if I were you, I might consider more deeply what that cross you're wearing might mean and how that person might have treated this girl. I was like, zing, bitch. Oh, I was so proud of her for doing that, So in that moment, too, the woman still didn't apologize. But what I'm hoping is that we have Christians.
No, but maybe that cross did burn a little bit on her skin.
Maybe. But I always think I'm so curious if Jesus ever came back and saw that, if he would just have a PTSD response. You know what I'm saying? I would have certainly hoped Jesus has done his trauma work.
Like Andy says, Jesus ducks in the Old Testament, God picks him up and throws him into hell. Have you ever heard him say that?
No.
Andy says that. I said it once. I don't even remember the context.
He was just talking about when I read the Bible. He said when you read the New Testament, Jesus is so full of love and mercy and grace and all this. And Jesus brought grace and truth. But, the Old Testament God, a lot of times he's like, kill every man, woman, child, and beast and don't take anything from them.
I know.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Obliterate.
So he's like, he always imagines whenever something like that comes up, Jesus ducks down and then, God.
Old Testament God, takes over.
Right, that's funny. But I'm hoping that the people that are coming to this podcast are also people that are interested in figuring out how to actually walk out their Christianity. And that's what my blog, My Boyfriend's Ex-Girlfriend's all about. Because in my relationship with that young woman, I had the opportunity to actually walk out my salvation by looking at myself and addressing my own sin.
That's where it's at, man. That's where the rubber meets the road in the Christian
that's where the rubber meets the road. And so that's really what the blog is about. But the fact of the matter is, I cuss.
Yep.
I wouldn't say a lot.
Like a sailor that went into port.
But I cuss and I say I say sort of inflammatory things. I said before, I try to remember to refer to God and as they them, because God is neither male nor female. Theoretically, the people who talked about God when they were writing about God refer to God as male, but maybe that's just because they were male.
They were in a patriarchal society,
right? They were in a patriarchal society. I say things like that, but I am a Christian, but this because Notes from the Underground began as a subset of the Burroughs of Berea podcast,
yes,
where you don't cuss.
We try not to.
We try not to.
We have young kids that listen to our show now, so we try to be kind. Yeah,
still absorbing the fact that I can say whatever I want now. Because,
you can do it
because this is Notes from the Underground. Which so Rick, why don't you talk a little bit about Burroughs of Berea?
Okay, so.
And talk about yourself. Your name is Rick Welch.
It's one of my favorite things to do.
You live in Hendersonville, North Carolina.
I live in Hoopers Creek.
Oh.
Hoopers Creek is a little tiny town inside of the town of Fletcher. It's a little community inside the town of Fletcher. And as a matter of fact, I was born, let's start this off. It was the best of times.
It was the worst of times.
So I was actually born in Michigan. And then when I was 6 months old, we moved to Maine. That's where my father's family's from. And then when I was 5, we moved here to North Carolina, and I actually moved into the Hoopers Creek community when we first moved here. And then I was raised on a farm there, and then we left. My dad was just basically a laborer. He worked on the farm. He didn't have any kind of education because he was 16 years old when I was born. So by the time he got down here, he was 21 and still trying to figure out what he was doing with his life. He eventually became a carpenter, and a really, really good one, a master carpenter actually, but which he taught a lot to me. But so the Hoopers Creek community is very important to me because it's one of the first places I came. It's when I went, first went to school, and I was in that community. And then we moved later into the Naples community and then out to Etowah, which is kind of, for us, it's a little far. It's a 20-minute, 30-minute drive. So, and now I am married to my wife, and we live in Hoopers Creek again. And I only live a stone's throw from where I grew up.
Isn't that beautiful?
I love it. Yeah. And so a lot of the people do remember me. As a matter of fact, the pastor of the church that we used to go to, his family owned a dairy farm, and that was my father's second job when we were here. And he worked for that pastor's grandfather. And so we know that family intimately. And so it's a very tight-knit, very Southern Baptist community, and I love it there. I do. I love that area. Although I must say there is a lot of meth that's come into that area now, it's sad to see. I see a lot of people like zombies walking the roads and stuff. It's pretty wild, man. But anyway, Yeah, so I was introduced to the faith whenever I was around the age of 10. My grandmother introduced it to me. There was a church, Stony Mountain Baptist Church in Hendersonville, that had a bus ministry. They had just started, and my grandmother took me and my sister, and we went with her on that bus a couple times until we got used to it. And so every Sunday we would go and ride the bus to church. That lasted for all of about a year and a half. But I was introduced to Christ, to the gospel. I responded to that as a kid, and it was important to me. But then when the bus ministry ended, then that was kind of like where it ended for me, like the discipleship ended.
Yeah.
And it didn't come back again until I was with the Riley family, and Rachel introduced me to First Baptist Church of Hendersonville, which was wild because
How old were you then?
I was at that point I was 16.
Okay. So so in the in-between times, you just didn't even really think anything about Jesus?
No, I had a lot of guilt. I felt like I was raised Catholic.
Oh.
Because I had learned one of the things when I was introduced to the gospel, which was, have you ever told a lie? And the answer was yes.
Yeah.
Then I knew I was a sinner, and because I was a sinner, then I had to ask for forgiveness.
Right.
Well, then what I learned was just enough to know that I was doing the things that were wrong. And so I just lived with a lot of guilt, and I had no discipleship to even understand how you grow as a Christian. None of it. Like, it just didn't happen for me. And so I was very confused, as a kid, like trying to figure out what I did. Unfortunately, right before I left, I had been that fundamentalist church, that Baptist church, they were teetotalers about alcohol and you couldn't have it. My father drank. And so it caused issues in my family. I didn't trust my dad. That's whenever my dad stopped being my hero, was thanks to the church kind of stuff, but I didn't have any understanding. Huh?
I said, big same.
Yeah.
My dad's gay.
Right.
So
then
big same.
All the things that you hear, then it's like, do I love him? How do I love him? What is this? It just made me question everything. And so when I started going to First Baptist Church with the Riley family, it wasn't the family, actually. They were atheists, but Rachel was not. Rachel was a believer, and she invited me and my best friend, her brother, Alan, and we started going with her. And so I was there for the girls because they were hot, and that's what I wanted to see, and I didn't care. I was 16. I was a raging, testosterone and fueled kid. But I heard some things, I picked up a few things here and there. It really didn't take shape in me because I've been called a liberal, which is strange to me. I'm not really that liberal. I mean, I'm a pretty conservative person, and when it comes to Christianity, I'm very conservative about it. But when I got married and had our daughter, Kelly had already had Maddie. I adopted Maddie, and then we had Catherine, and Jonas, my son. And that's when it really got serious to me because I was, I'm their father. And so I'm like, what do I want to teach my kids? And it's like, what do I know? Wow, I don't really know much, but I do know this. And so we decided to start going to church together. And we went to a little church called Christ Community, where Pastor Philip Trees, he's still the pastor. It's now called the Feed and Seed, but it's the same church. It was a church plant that First Baptist of Hendersonville had done in Arden,
The name of the
North Carolina.
church is the Feed and Seed?
Feed and Seed. It's actually in the old
That's
Fletcher.
Adorable.
It's the old Fletcher Supply building.
Yeah.
That's in Fletcher, North Carolina. And right now it's considered a historic landmark. And it's also one of the, what do you call it, on the bluegrass people, they go from town to town. It's on some sort of a map where they're well known for bluegrass.
Yeah, they're well known for bluegrass. I've been there to live record a bluegrass band.
Yeah, and so Philip was he's a pastor on Sunday, but he runs that bluegrass.
It's also, a reasonably, if you're into bluegrass, it's a reasonably well-known bluegrass venue.
Exactly.
Wow, the church.
Yeah, it's called Feed and Seed.
I think that's just, I said adorable. It's kind of diminutive. What a cool concept.
Well, I mean, because it is like, that's literally where you would go buy feed and seed.
Exactly,
I love that.
The supply company. It was like a hardware store, but you could get your feed and seed. And then, of course, there is another company right there in Fletcher that started, it's always been there, where Fletcher, it's called the Fletcher or something, something where you buy your feeds and seed and stuff. You can still do it. You can still go there and buy it. But Philip Trees was an amazing pastor. He stayed in the Gospel of John the whole time I was at that church, and that's a phenomenal book, high Christological, but a lot about love. And Philip is a very soft-spoken man, and he's very astute. He's been to seminary. He's a very smart person, but he's unassuming. You'd never know that about him. He was just a very kind person, and still is. I love him dearly.
I love it. He's just a very kind person, and still is, as if there was probably a universe in which you were going to go. But that all changed.
Well, I got news for you. If you've been in the church long enough, it can happen. Trust me. I mean, especially somebody, he stayed faithful to this congregation that would dwindle down as low as 6 people. So he's not in it for the money.
Boy, the preachers of small places are, I mean, that's not an easy,
right.
Or it's a difficult gig that I think could get discouraging.
Absolutely. And I would, like, for me, like, if I watched my church dwindle down to 6 people, I would be questioning everything that I was doing. But he just has a heart for people. He's there. He's going to do it. He does everything he possibly can to encourage and to help. And that's what he does. And he'll never change. I know that, unless he has something that happened like a TBI. Otherwise, he's going to be that man. That's who he is, right?
What's TBI?
Total brain injury.
Oh, yeah. Like
and I met
Sam
somebody,
Kinniston.
Yeah, I met somebody that happened to, where they were the sweetest person, and then after that injury, they were no longer the sweet person.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and that's a whole conversation within the NFL, and that's why we've had to start asking ourselves, some of these football players that went on to like have terrible problems with alcoholism.
Absolutely.
How much of that was who they were, and how much of it was because of the traumatic brain injuries that I believe, if I'm not wrong, were suppressed by whoever was the like head medical doctor of the NFL, and then they got a new doctor. I think there's a movie with Will Smith.
Oh,
that's about it.
There was one a couple years ago that I did not see, and by a couple, it could be 10 or 4.
Yeah,
So but this pastor that you're talking about, he did not have a total brain injury.
He did not.
And so so his personality has remained intact.
I'm really glad we cleared that up.
I am.
So he actually did a class at the church it was on Sunday evenings, because we didn't really have Sunday night services, and he did this class for Sunday evenings, and it was called "What is the Bible and How do I Apply It?" And I went to that class because I didn't really know anything about the Bible. I just knew what it was to be guilty for a lot of things. And I didn't understand the Bible at all. And I took to that class like a horse to water. I mean, a fish to water.
Yeah. And this is after,
not a horse to water.
And this is after all your children are born, or after your first
After
one?
my kids are born.
After all 3 of them were born.
Yeah, all 3 of them were born.
So how old were you at that point?
I was probably 27, 26.
Okay. So your kids were little, real little.
My kids were little. Yeah. And so I went to that class, and he opened up the entire world to me of what the Bible actually was, how it was you put together, and what those books meant, where they were in the time in which they were written. And then he also, it was application based, how do I apply it? So he started teaching how you could read specific scriptures, and you could know that this is actually meant for you. You're going to learn from this. And that revolutionized my life and my Bible study. It changed everything for me. And so I started reading a lot. And you're going to hear this a lot, and I'm sorry if my ex-wife hears this, but the reality is the whole reason why we were leaving churches is because she was unhappy in them. And so we would leave and go to different churches. But I've learned now to appreciate the fact that happened, because I got to see a taste of a lot of different kinds of churches in our area. We went to the Rock of Asheville for a while. It's incredibly Pentecostal and very charismatic. And that never sat well with me whenever I was there. But I got a good flavor, tasting of each one of those kinds of churches.
You went to the church buffet.
I did.
And you put a little bit of each church and each denomination on your plate.
I did. And so after I left there,
you have to try those peas before you throw them out.
Yeah.
Listen, don't knock it till you try it.
After we left Christ Community, it was before it was Feed and Seed. They had started a coffee shop called the Encouraging Cup. And it was a really cool coffee shop. And then they mixed with another group that had another one called My Father's House. And it became the Encouraging Cup of My Father's House. It's a mouthful. But that's where I started comedy. I started doing stand-up comedy. And I was going to different places and doing comedy. And that was one of them. That was one of the first Christian places I ever went to do comedy.
Y'all cannot see my face right now. My jaw just hit the floor. I did not know that.
Oh, I did stand up, yeah.
That is awesome.
Yep, I did. I loved it. I've always been a stand-up freak. Like, I love stand-up.
I love stand-up comedy. I have Netflix only because they have a stand-up comedy special series that I always watch.
Yeah, they pay for a lot of stand-up.
Netflix is a joke. Yeah, that, and they have pretty much everybody on there.
Yeah.
The Chappelle and Gervais and all those guys.
Yeah, all those guys, they're on Netflix because Netflix is financing the specials they're making.
They certainly are, or they're buying them. They're buying the specials that they do.
Yeah.
So I was doing stand-up, and I started doing it in that coffee shop, and I was, it was really a weird place. Doing comedy in a coffee shop is kind of odd, like for me anyway, because It always sounded like a Sprint commercial. Like every time I'd talk, it was like you could hear a pin drop. It was terrible. I was like, huh? I could do the same bits, which were clean bits, in a comedy, like at the Comedy Store down in Charlotte, or the Comedy Zone, and they would kill.
They'd get reactions.
But in this place, they wouldn't. And it was such a weird dynamic.
Yeah.
And I started learning how to specialize the comedy for whatever venue I was in. That's where I learned it. I bombed all the time. That's how I learned.
Yeah.
And so it was fun for a time. And I've sort of, my son is that way now. He's actually done some stand-up himself. And it's very funny, that happened. But he was there when I was like learning how to do it. But I started going to this church. It's the church I actually go to now, which is kind of strange. East Hendersonville Baptist Church. They're deeply Calvinist. But it was the first time I had ever been introduced to the author A.W. Pink, Arthur Walkington Pink. Have you ever heard of him?
Mm-mm.
So he was deeply Calvinist, which also introduced me to C.H. Spurgeon, who was also deeply Calvinist. And I started studying that, the total sovereignty of God in all things and salvation. So there's a flavor for you.
Yeah.
And I started going to that church. We weren't there long, probably about a year. And then my wife and I, we split. It was not an amicable split. It was tough. But after that, now everything's good now. And then I got remarried and started going to Hoopers Creek. And we moved to Hoopers Creek. We started going to that Hoopers Creek church, which is deeply fundamental, not Calvinist. Very free will thinking. And so I just, I've seen it and felt it all. I feel like, a lot of it, visiting all those different churches at different times. But it was during my time there, in my second marriage, it fell apart. It was terrible. And now I've said this on the podcast before. I love my second wife. I still love her. We're actually friends. And like I said in the previous episode with Dr. Smith, that I had, that Jacob, had a son. And so that's from my second marriage. He's my stepson, but I don't think of step, when they're my kids, like they're my kids. That's just how it's going to be. I'm not trying to take away from their father. They have a loving, wonderful father, but I'm just another guy that loves these kids with all my heart. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. So after my second marriage was, fell apart, my friend Billy Kimsey, who I've known, for years now, right before that second marriage fell apart, I had just felt this necessity to wrestle with the things that I was wrestling with and get it out of me. And being a comedian is like a form of art. And so I decided to start making films. And that, for me, I started writing screenplays, wrestling with certain aspects of life. For example, I wrote Stillwater. Well, I didn't write it. I came up with the idea for Stillwaters. I met with James Newman, the author. He's a horror fiction writer. And he wrote the script for us, but Stillwaters was about a serial killer that drowned women. Like, that's what he did. And his last and final victim was a Christian who had cerebral palsy. And I was putting that together because I was wrestling with the fact that A, we have serial killers in the world, and B, you have Christians who are incredibly weak. And how do I reconcile the two, and how does faith work?
Yeah.
And so that's what that film was about. It was just me wrestling with that thing.
Yeah, with the power dynamics that exist in our universe.
That's right. How does that work if we have an almighty God, but yet he allows this evil to take place? Isn't that one of the questions we always ask? If you have a loving God, then why is there evil in the world? Yeah. So that's what the movie's about. Yeah. That's really what it's about. And then I started dealing with atheism because I was raised in it. And I still had those questions like, what if all of this is just junk and I need to just go live my life? I am wasting a lot of my time. I want to go do other things. Yeah. So I wrote that film about a journalist who was writing her final senior entry for the paper that she wrote for the university. And it was on this woman who was considered a witch because some crops went bad and she was like living up in the woods and, kind of like the way meth people do now. They go up and they live in the woods in tents and stuff. And the community, they don't know what to do with these people. And she was one of those type. But she was highly educated. She was a botanist. She knew all these things. All she was doing was up there just getting away from the world because her deacon husband was abusive. Yeah. And I wanted to wrestle with that. So how do you deal with that? So you've got one person who used to be a believer but isn't any longer because they were abused by a believer. Right. And which is so many of our stories. Oh, gosh.
Like so many of us have that story. Yeah.
So I wrote that film, wrestling with that. And then I wrote a Christmas film, which is basically just about grief during the holidays. And there was the name of the character is Dr. Logan Snow. The film is called Let It Snow. It's still on TakiTaiFilms.com. I put it out every single Christmas for free.
Well, we can link that too in the show notes.
Cool, yeah.
TakiTai.com. So if anybody wants to watch these films that we're talking about and learn more about Rick, go ahead and go.
The local Catholic church here, the Church of the Immaculate Conception. There was one of the guys that was in the film went there and he shared that film there. They started using it as a form of grief counseling there, and then spread it. I don't know how far it went into the Catholic
incredible.
Church.
No, that is cool.
But the whole idea of it was all of these people that are sitting in a room are dealing with the death of a loved one during the holidays, and it's ruined the holidays for them. And that happened for me because Rachel Riley, who had introduced me to, First Baptist Church of Hendersonville, had died tragically in a car wreck. And that was when she was 16. So I was 19 at that time. So later on when I'm writing the film, that's how long my grief lasted for Rachel. It was years, and I didn't know it because I'd never really dealt with it. So it was very cathartic for me to sit down and write that. And me and Kaylee Sellers co-wrote and co-produced that together and made that. Of course, every film I've ever done, Andy's been my sound guy.
Yeah.
And so
that's fun. I haven't done much film except with Rick, and I'm happy to do it.
Yeah.
I've done some voiceover work outside of that mostly, but
Yeah.
Well, in which we've talked about before when we did like the very, very, very first episode that I posted for Notes from the Underground is about the fact that while this is all going on simultaneously, I am Kaylee Sellers' hairdresser.
Yes.
Her and her mom had been her hairdresser since she was a child because she's got hair like that character from the movie Brave.
Yeah.
Just giant
Merida
curls.
or whatever.
Totally.
Yeah, which is interesting because now my daughter has that hair, which I all know exactly what to do with it. So meanwhile, like that's connection A with us. And also I'd known Andy. Andy's my oldest friend in the world now, really? That I still talk to. That I still talk to on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Because Andy and I were in a band together called Albatross Party when I was like 20.
For years.
Yep.
A long
Yeah, for
time.
years. We were 7 or 8 years.
Which
I know,
is
it's a great
actually
band.
how
Yeah.
it
Fun
linked
band.
me to you, because as I was building the soundtrack, Andy had all of these people that he had already recorded. He mentioned it to them about,
Yeah,
I
Rick-
had a film.
Rick needed music.
Yeah.
And I
But
was
not.
like,
But
I
now we're
know
still talking
people.
about the Christmas film.
All right.
Right, yeah.
So you did not for that film.
Actually, Kaylee actually helped me with Witch.
Yeah.
That's how I met Kaylee. Kaylee came on. The first thing that I shot, I didn't white balance, and it was horrible. It was so yellow. I was
that
like,
Stillwater?
no, that was Witch.
Oh, that was Witch.
The second
Okay.
film. And
Yeah, it was the
so
library scene. I remember
a friend of
it.
mine, Michael Spears, who has been on the Burrows, he introduced me to Kaylee and said, "Look, if anybody can correct this footage, it's going to be her, because she went to film school and she's an editor. So she did. She fixed it, and I was like, "Stay with me. Let's keep doing this." And so she helped me film Witch, and helped me edit it and make the film what it was. And then we co-wrote "Let It Snow" together.
So which was 2017.
That's right. And so
And-
that's how Andy used music from Albatross Party. One of my favorite songs in the world today is "Song for Mary," still to this day.
Thank you.
I love that song.
I love that song
thank
too.
you.
Yep. And then you guys allowed me to use that music because the band had been defunct, and so I used it in the film. Then you came to the
Does
Poe House.
conclude the last time we ever played together, too, actually.
Yep.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Super
All right, anyway,
sad.
sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say Kimberly Rourke at the Poe House. It's still a wonderful little place that you can go to in Hendersonville. She allowed us to have a CD after party, like the dropping of that, which sold, by the way, the CD sold more copies than the film because of all that music. It was incredible. It was a great
soundtrack.
It really
It
was.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That's how all of us kind of like, that's how I really got to meet you. And that's really where that started initially. After Let It Snow was put out and my marriage fell apart and everything, I went into a dark 5-year period where I wasn't going to church or anything. But during that time, I could not let go of my faith. I just couldn't. There was something about Jesus Christ that I could not let go of. And I would still read my Bible and I would still try to study it and try to find ways to apply it like I'd learned at Philip Tree's church. But I really wasn't sure. And Billy Kimsey, I met my current wife, Holly, and we were just really talking at the time. I was living in a little apartment in Fletcher. Billy Kimsey reached out to me and we started just talking about, he was going through a divorce and he wanted to talk about the Bible a little bit. And I was like, let's do a little study. And he's like, my problem is, man, I can do all this study, but I can't remember it. And so I was like, well, let me call Andy and see if maybe we can book the studio and we'll just do these and we'll record them, because I want to see Andy and I love to support him, and his business, he is a gem. Most people don't really realize what a gem we have in this area. I'm not just saying that, it's the truth. And so,
Oh, shucks.
yeah, you
Andy,
really are.
Andy's been doing this a long time,
A
and he's
long
really good
time.
at it.
Yeah. He gives reasonable rates, and he's very fast. He's efficient, but the work is just, it's quality. So like that you just heard, which nobody is hearing, is because Andy probably took it out. So anyway, so whenever we came here, we just recorded that.
I just decided I'm going to repeat it a couple times. Yes.
So Billy asked me, to do that study, and I said, let's record it. And so we did it. And after we did it, we started doing it several times, and he was surprised what he was learning. It was things that he had never heard. He's said on the Burros of Berea many times, he's learned more in the last 4 years than he had all of the 40 years of his life. So for him, that meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
And we just decided to start tackling things. We wanted to have opinions and speculations about it. We didn't want to just be like, hey, we're, like Dad over Dogma. Like, we're not those guys. You know, like we're reading it to the best of our ability as lay people and trying to interpret it. But in doing so, I just felt compelled to have people come on and share their testimonies, because the things I was learning was that from every other church, all of these people had an individual experience with God. And to me, that meant something. And in our last guest that came and shared her testimony, her name was Kirsten Brooks Barton. And she was here in the studio with us, and she had sent me a message afterwards, and she was like, who are the most famous people you've had on your show? And I told her, I was like, there's something that I've learned. Number one, famous is a weird word to me. I don't care about fame. The most well-known people are such and such. I was like, but what I don't want you to miss, and I told Kirsten this, so what I don't want you to miss is that your individual testimony meant something to God. It was you're well known to him. So that makes you very important to me, which means every single person that comes on here, your testimony matters to me, right? So that's whenever you and I decided, Andy brought you on for us to have like a little side study, which became Notes from the Underground for us on the Burros, to just talk about, initially we were going to talk about hell, but it ended up being your testimony.
Yeah.
And so when I heard your testimony, I was like, done. I want you on. Like, you're the person that's, you have at least got some education in this. You're progressive, you're liberal, you have a different voice, and it matters to me because you are one that God brought into this fold too. The end. So it was like, let's do it. And so it became Notes from the Underground, and we just started doing things on the side. For me, it's been a wonderful thing. I've learned so much from you. The only thing is that, and what makes me happy about the fact that we're splitting it out, is because it needs to be. It's a different kind of conversation that when we're doing our Bible study in the group, because we have so many different voices and we're bringing it, it can be hard when you got 7 and 8 people in the room. It really can be. And so, for me on the journey, my whole belief has changed dramatically just from studying the Bible, meeting people, hearing the testimonies, doing research on my own. I've grown a tremendous amount, but I'm still very conservative. And so that's, for me, on Notes from the Underground, that's the voice I'm bringing here. Is I'm more of a conservative Christian. I'm not as liberal thinking and as progressive as you may be. But if you want to hear what I have to say, I'll bring it, like I will. If I disagree, I'll disagree. I mean, and that's fine. But that doesn't stop me from loving and moving forward in a study and keeping trucking. But you have a very solid voice that you need to get out to the world. It's a thing. It really is. And I know some people, when I said Notes from the Underground was breaking out, they were like, bummer, this sucks. But so I'll say it now. Tiziana's not leaving the Burros. Tiziana is still a Burro. She's actually going to come and fill in on Thursday nights, like Sarita, who is winning that that election very well.
And just to clarify for Notes listeners, Sarita Edgerton is a regular contributor on the Burros of Berea podcast, and she's running for office in South Carolina right now.
That's right.
Yeah.
And she's doing phenomenal. She's actually in a runoff right now. And today she is out canvassing all of those neighborhoods, just meeting those people again and more people. And, Cherry's on sabbatical until the end of July. And so, please keep coming and come on Thursday nights. But Rick Carter was so heartbroken. He was like, and he's on the Burros too. We call him Big Daddy. You called him Big Daddy.
Yeah.
That's how he got his name. So we all call him Big Daddy now. But he was like, dude, no. I need Tiziana. I was like, trust me, you're still going to have Tiziana. We're still going to have these talks, but she's going to come and be on the Burros too. So he was very happy about that. And so am I. So that's me. As far as, I am still conservative. I'm still Christian. I'm a little out there in comparison to what I used to be. But the thing that I mostly have learned is that if we're breeding hate, then it's wrong. And we need to learn what it means to love people that are different from us and to really work at it. That's it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I love that. And when I first came on the Burroughs of Berea podcast, I was studying at ILIF and everything. And I think I sort of had this like, well, I'm going to tell them how it really is on that show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like all that stuff. And have promptly been humbled several times as I have had to come back and correct what I said and be like, nope, that's not actually what happened. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Thinking that I knew more than I did. And in the process of it, also, you've always been so kind to me. And that's something that we miss a lot.
And if I don't have a TBI.
Right. Well, so far.
That's called a callback in comedy.
If you don't receive a TBI at some point. But that's the other thing that I think is really important. And we've talked about this on the Burroughs. We're going to talk about here at Notes. And I want this to always be what undergirds all of our discussions. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. We're working on our theologies. We're working on our eschatologies. We're digging into the archaeological texts. But all that really matters is that you and I both love Jesus. Mm-hmm. And we both want to do our best to live our life on this planet in a fashion that he would approve of.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And Andy could enjoy.
Yeah.
Andy can enjoy it. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely.
Do you get what I mean? Like the whole idea is that, so he doesn't believe this, but he understands that he's our family too. Like we love him and bring him in, right?
Yeah, exactly. And same with anybody else that's listening that doesn't necessarily subscribe to Christianity, but maybe you're curious about the history of it, or you have family members that are Christian.
Absurdists are welcome.
And absurdists. Calling all absurdists.
Yeah.
We have a seat at the table for you.
Yeah, there's 12 more probably in Western North Carolina.
I literally am going to going to Google it now because I have no idea.
More
no, there's more. There's more than that. I think there's a lot of people that are absurdists that just don't know what the name.
They don't know what it means.
They don't know that.
They don't know what they are. But that's the thing. I mean, we get into these conversations, especially political conversations, because for some reason, right, like Christianity has become so politicized in our country that like if you don't believe X, Y, and Z, if you're not a conservative Christian, then you're not really a Christian.
Yeah.
And if you are a liberal Christian like myself, I definitely am more leftist and more liberal of a Christian. I don't have a denomination anymore, but probably best described as Methodist.
Yeah.
That's my version of Christianity. If you're on that side of the story.
Which used to be very, very conservative.
Yeah.
It's the United Methodists that really, I think you'd be more united.
Probably. Actually, they have a church split recently.
But
here's the thing.
Go, yeah.
So like those people, like that end of that side of the teeter-totter, as it were, that side of the seesaw, they have a tendency to categorize the conservative Christians in this very negative way. Mm-hmm. And describe an entire body of people as if they are, not educated or like, aren't loving or just full of hate and all this other and that's not true. And because we have, these very polarized political, spiritual and political poles, very polarized poles. This just in, polls are polarized. So because we have that, though, like what winds up happening is there's this whole middle ground where we actually live and where we actually meet. Mm-hmm. And, that's one of the things that happens on the Burroughs is that like there's actually a lot more that we agree on than we don't.
Yeah.
And there is a way to have discourse with love. There is a way to have discourse with kindness towards and respect towards one another. And that's something that's always characterized the Burroughs of Berea podcast, which is why Notes from the Underground is not divorced from Burroughs of Berea.
No, not at all.
We are like a siblings. Mm-hmm. We are a podcast siblings.
I would call it like a brand. It's branding a little bit. For us, we're more catered toward the family. We're going to try to minimize. Now, we're going to talk about tough subjects, but we're going to try to minimize maybe the language somewhat. And then also, I don't want to come off wrong here by saying this, but we do, like I said before, we do have young kids that are like 10 and 12 and stuff. And I don't want Andy. Yeah. I don't want to pay Andy for an hour beeping things, so I tell everybody like, let's chill. And then, but also to be like a true, just a study sometimes instead of really getting into the deep thorny topics. Like Notes is about thorny topics. It's not what the Burroughs is just about, so it's a brand. You are thorny.
Yeah.
So you're still going to see ads on the Burroughs that are going to be pointing to you. We're still going to be talking with each other and about each other and all that. So it's not a divorce by any stretch.
No. And I just think this is really special. And as Notes, like at this juncture, it's June of 2024.
Yeah.
And at this juncture, Notes is a little fledgling. I've got 5 followers on Spotify.
It is.
You know, it's just a little guy. But even as it moves forwards, I think it's important to kind of like lay that foundation. I want to continue to always be a place where, even if I am bringing a theologically
difficult
or no, like progressive or leftist or, you know, exploratory theological lens to things.
I would frequently describe that as difficult.
Yeah, difficult.
It's true.
You know, I don't ever want it to be a place where, and then the other people are bad because they don't think this way. That's not how this works, you know?
No, I mean, and truth be told, like, so when you did your study on same-sex in the Bible, I'd never heard of pederasty. I didn't know it was a thing. I'd always heard the Greeks, they're disgusting. You know, that's all I heard, but I didn't know why. And I didn't know how that carried over into the language, how it worked in the Bible, how Paul utilized certain things from Greek culture, things that I didn't know. I had no clue, but I learned it and I'm better for it.
Yeah.
I think that is a thorny topic to discuss. We're in June. This is Pride Month. There are people on my side that are on the conservative side that are disgusted by it. There are people on your side who aren't, who are saying, look, be all inclusive. We're sharing the gospel with everybody. Let's tell everybody. But again, with the branding, you have more of flexibility. You have more liberty to speak about that and then not have, you know, 4 of us that are in the room that are going to be like, no, we can't. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
You're not going to focus on that part.
Yeah. And I don't want to. Have you ever seen the second Batman?
Mm-hmm.
Where
talking about the Dark Knight, or are you talking about Batman 2?
No, okay. I'm talking
Danny
about
DeVito Batman or Heath
Ledger.
Ledger?
Danny DeVito Batman.
Okay, Batman Returns.
Not Batman Returns. Okay. The one where Jim Carrey was the Riddler.
Well,
that's like the third one.
That's like the third one. And Chris O'Donnell, I think, is Robin. There's this one scene.
Never
Batman Forever.
Never overlook Danny DeVito's performance as the Penguin again. I'm just warning you now.
So Batman Returns, that second Batman, will forever be like my most favorite Batman of all time.
Oh, mine's The Dark Knight.
I loved that movie
Heath Ledger
so much.
one?
Yes.
Oh, that one's so good too. Both those movies are
I can't
they're
stand
both
Christian
really
Bale,
good.
and I love The Dark Knight, if that tells you anything.
Sorry,
well,
I just wanted you to put some respect on Danny DeVito's name.
Very important.
So Batman Forever.
The oft overlooked performance of. Well, yeah, Batman Forever. There's just one scene where Batman has to leave his car to go do something else, and he's like, shields. And like the car's like, and it just automatically like covers itself up.
Yep.
I get that way sometimes.
Sure.
You know, and I don't want to get that way. I don't want to feel like I'm putting all of my shields on because that's in order to say something, because that creates for me like a fight or flight response. And then now I'm triggered and I'm dysregulated. And now I'm talking out of my emotional brain and I'm apt to say something that's not Christ-like and that I regret saying. And even if, you know, somebody were to hear it and as a, you know, more progressive leftist Christian might be applauding, I wouldn't be applauding and neither would Jesus.
Right.
And that's like the other
role
thing.
of women. That's been the role of women in our society. Yeah. They've had to shield themselves, right?
Yeah.
I'll never forget on the Burroughs, we had Dr. Don Preston. I love this guy. He's great. He's been writing, for 40 years, deeply full preterist. And he tells in his own personal story how his mother wrote his sermons for him because he became a preacher at like the age of 14, I think, 14 or 15. And so for the first 3 or 4 years, he was preaching, but it was his mother that was writing the sermons.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yep.
Now, isn't that wild?
Yeah.
I asked him, I said, did it ever occur to you that your mother was speaking in church, but she was just doing it vicariously through you?
Yeah.
You know, and he was like, yes, of course. And so I'm like, interesting. And all of those people heard that sermon thinking it was coming from a young man when in reality it was coming from a woman who was brilliant and knew the scriptures through and through. That's what I'm talking about, you know, and I think that women have had enough of that. Like, just freely speak. You need to.
Yeah. But when I'm in a room where I'm the only person who's super liberal, that can get scary.
That's
true.
True.
So that's another reason why, but I still love everybody out there. And I would absolutely want every single one of those people to come on this show some point.
Yeah, big same.
They're lovely people.
Not always wanting to get into it though.
But I'm not always wanting to get into it and not always feeling like if I'm going to, like right before something authentic comes out of my mouth, I have to be like, shields, you know?
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. And here's the other thing that I really love about you, Rick, because my degree is
I can't wait to hear. I love it. I love it.
No, so my degree is sociology with a minor in women, gender, and sexuality studies. When it comes to any of those topics, I feel perfectly comfortable and like in my element, right? And I have half a master's of divinity does not an expert make.
Right.
All right. Can we just say that out loud? And I am
It is
not.
a half a master's more than me.
Right. Well, yeah. But I mean, I've taken 3 classes, or 4 Bible classes. The other ones are like in ethics, which is also very interesting, but like Christian ethics. So when it comes to the sociology of Christianity and like sort of how these texts create power structures and all this other stuff, that's where I feel most in my element. You have read a lot more than me. You really have. You've read about eschatology, which is, again, for folks that are just new, that's the study of like what happens after we die and like future things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you've read a lot more about eschatology than me, even though I accidentally believed the same thing you believed without even knowing that it was called preterism.
There you go.
That was funny. But, you've read
I
ancient
remember
church
when you
fathers,
said 70 AD, I could have kissed you.
You were like,
who
what?
are you?
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. But see, and that was purely academic,
Yeah.
It didn't come. It was purely academic. It didn't come from studying all the different belief systems, all the different kinds of eschatological beliefs that have cropped up since Paul wrote all of his stuff,
Yep.
You actually did a study on it. I heard once about preterism. I was like, oh, I like that one.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And so you've read a lot more than me. Mm-hmm. And even though like maybe Notes from the Underground are things that I come up with, maybe Notes from the Underground are research that I bring to the table, but like you're the other half of it. I couldn't do it without you because you also know a lot more than I do about, even what you said about Calvinism. You've read all these different authors. You've read all these different early church fathers. Like we talk about Eusebius of Caesarea. Eusebius. See? I didn't even say his name right. Eusebius. We talk about like, this is what happens. My brain gets like dumb. I think that's the ADHD in me because my mouth is always like a few steps ahead of my brain.
Let me rephrase this. You're telling me how much you love me.
That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. And but I'm also telling you how important you are because when we first had this conversation about what I wanted from Notes moving forward, and you were like, I want to be as involved as you want me to be. I want you to be involved all the way.
Okay.
Because you know stuff I don't know, and you can point me in directions that I wouldn't have gone on my own. And I'm going to pin this episode, but there's another episode. We just recorded it. It'll be somewhere in Notes. We had Dr. Eric Smith, who's a professor at ILIF, come on here and talk about pseudepigraphal writing and the New Testament. Mm-hmm. And you said a bunch of stuff that made me go, oh, well, now hold on a second. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it gives you, it sounds like I'm of the camp that 1 Timothy wasn't written by Paul. It was written by someone else who signed Paul's name to it. Mm-hmm. And you're of the camp that even if that happened, it was still maybe dictated by Paul and it's still very much Pauline. Yes. Whereas I'm like, it could have been anybody. Mm-hmm. Right.
I also am the one that holds that all of them were written prior to the destruction of Jerusalem because none of them talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
And I look at a lot of the internal evidence. So I'm that guy too. So it's because of my passion for the scriptures that I get into those little nuances that they talk about that are contradictory that I look at and say, well, hold on, before we go to that length, can we at least look and see why it might seem like a contradiction? And if it is, fine, but let's at least look at it. I don't want to just say, well, that's contradictory, kick it out.
Right, yeah. Or it's not, it doesn't have any kind of spiritual relevance in terms of what the early church was getting out of it and what can we still get out, or that it wasn't inspired by God and all this other stuff.
But I need to say this. I'm not going to be like, so I'm the other guy, but I'm not going to be bringing it like an argument, like the other side of the coin. Like, no, like I want to bring who I am into it.
Yeah.
I do, and I might feel passionate about something at some point. I mean, that's not unheard of and it happens, right? But at the same time, I don't want to take away from that study either. I'm going to be engaged in that study.
I actually really detest the idea that every subject needs to be approached like completely dialectically.
Right.
Like your conversation is invalid.
Right.
If one person says the sky is blue, you don't have somebody that is arguing the sky is green.
Right.
Like you lack the green point of view. How can you have this conversation without the green point of view?
Exactly.
I don't know. That is not, everything does not have to be put at complete ends of the spectrum and like start shooting at each other. I am just dead sick
and that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. I'm not going to be bringing, that's not what I'm bringing.
So much media, I know. That's why I'm just ranting. But yeah, so much media is like, people will just be mad at you if you're just like, you don't have the extreme. If people aren't like arguing, you're just like, come on. Everything, that's not represented.
It's not necessary.
Well, and the way that social media works, people, you can say whatever you want because there's nobody in your face. There's no immediate response. There's no immediate consequence.
Right.
You can make a TikTok, and I'm pointing fingers at myself. You can make a TikTok that says something and then just walk away. I don't even ever have to read the comments if I don't want to, or like even more, I can turn the comments off. You know what I mean?
Dude, the last TikTok that you did, I was like, go on now, get it.
Which one? Because I posted another one yesterday.
It was the one that you were talking about Pride Month and about going back basically to what we were talking about the Greek culture. You would just you were carrying. I looked like you were carrying Jubilee around. It was really funny.
I'm carrying Jubilee around. Like, so when there's a costume change in my TikTok, it's because like I only can make like a quick clip now and then. Right. Do you know what I'm saying? Like my kids know what a ring light is at this point.
Yes, yeah, of course.
Like, you know, so I have to distract her a lot. So she had gotten up from a nap right when I thought I was going to have some time to record.
Yes.
And so that was like take number 3. I was like tossing her in the air so that she wouldn't so that she would giggle, you know?
I mean, you were busting everybody's proverbial balls is what you were doing, and I loved it. It was like, go after it now. I mean, you got a voice. Let it be heard.
Well, and I just did another one on Matthew 19 where Jesus says some people are born eunuchs, some people are made eunuchs by men, and some people choose it for the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. And I just did another one about that and how like, well, a eunuch is someone who's castrated. So people probably weren't castrating themselves for the kingdom of God. He was probably more talking about the lifestyle of a eunuch. And so when Jesus says some people are born not interested in women, not interested in getting married, especially because a lot of the times eunuchs in ancient culture were made eunuchs to keep them feminine.
Yeah.
Thinking that it would make them not be attracted to women and thinking, and then they were oftentimes used in a sexual fashion by the men that had made them that way. So like when Jesus says some people are born that way. Now, I also 100%, absolutely 100% recognize that I'm putting my 21st century lens on that.
Yep.
Jesus, I don't know if Jesus had any concept of a person with an innate, orientation because he was a deity. Right? He was God in flesh. So he might have known that. But he also, honestly, was a first century person. He might not have. I don't know. I'm reading into that what I want to read into
it's important to remember that he came for a specific reason. He had a reason for being here, and he fulfilled that reason.
Yeah.
That's what it was. He didn't have to utter every single thing so mankind could feel better about itself. I mean, he was here for a reason.
But that's a bold claim. So I can make a bold claim that Jesus said some people are born gay, that Jesus said some people are born gay in the first century, and then he said it casually too, right?
Yeah.
So that's a bold claim. I can make that claim when I'm on TikTok, right?
That's
when you're sitting in a room with another human being and you make a claim like that, and you have that other person that's able to check you. It must have been the paper you sent me because I did read a paper that argued 1 Timothy was not pseudepigraphal.
Yeah.
And that argued somebody else was dictating it.
That was the one from Liberty University.
I read that too.
That to you,
yeah, so you might have sent that to me. And oftentimes our beliefs are attached to our safety, and our safety is dependent on, our level of safety is often dependent on how much of our own trauma we've dealt with.
Oh,
right?
yes.
So you have these conversations where people are arguing about religion, but they're not arguing about religion. They're arguing about their safety, and it's all related to how much trauma work they've done. I've had a lot of trauma. I've also had a lot of therapy, but in that moment, reading that paper and then having Professor Smith, Dr. Smith come on and talk about the arguments for maybe somebody else wrote it down in his name, whatever, that made me kind of go, oh, and take my fire out of it a little bit. Cause sometimes I do get that fire that I know is just because I have to stand and die on this hill. Otherwise someone's going to come get me. You know what I mean? I recognize that sometimes my responses to things are coming out of my emotional brain because I'm dysregulated in some way. And so, but having you in the space, knowing you're kind, knowing you're loving, knowing you never try to say anything because you're trying to piss me off or whatever, that's what makes this relationship lovely. And it's what helps me grow as a Christian.
Yeah. Same here. Yeah. With what you just said, this is a remarkable thing. This will describe how you can grow as a believer and how Notes from the Underground will help you. You ready? Watch this. So whenever you talked about eunuchs, okay, I immediately thought of the Apostle Paul. This is whenever we were talking about that back then. And I let me give you an explanation. Paul would say, it is better if you don't marry. Now, people have taken that in the fundamental church. It is better for someone to marry than to burn. Now, I've heard sermons preached at me that if you have a person that is, you really need to go have sex, then you need to get married or you're going to burn in hell forever. You need to get that right. That's what they use. So if those ministers had taken a few minutes to look up that word burn and looked in the Greek to see that it meant to burn with passion, that what he's saying is that if you are the kind of person that's going to burn with passion, you're better off to be married. But most people don't realize why Paul wasn't married. The reason why Paul wasn't married was because he was ministering a gospel that was supposed to end within a few short years. That the end of all things, it was imminent to him.
Yeah.
So it's if you can make it and make your life be about the gospel only and get as much of this information out as you can before the end of our world, you need to do that. But if you can't, if you are the kind of person that burns with passion, don't go and just have sex willy-nilly. Enter into a relationship and have a right marital relationship for yourself. Do that. That's what Paul meant.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Notes from the Underground opens up the idea of what the eunuch was. I can see, well, Paul is obviously one of those spiritual eunuchs. He's one of those people that he has cut himself off from that because the message is more important than the relationship with another person at this time.
But he likely didn't castrate himself
not
in
at
reality.
all. And
so it's not about that. Yeah,
so
exactly.
you can learn
that's
all
cool.
of these things. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Notes from the Underground created that, sparked that. And so then I began to go back and to study a little bit more. And I was like, man, those sermons I heard as a kid, they were wrong. They were all wrong. They totally missed the point.
So Burroughs of Berea has an episode where you are preaching a sermon.
Yeah, a couple of them.
But the one that most recently that we were just talking about earlier was about Jesus and about his visiting Mary, Martha, and Lazarus and Bethany,
Jesus loved,
and how you read this extra biblical source that said Bethany was probably a place for the sick, and then you talked a lot about spikenard and its properties as a medicinal herb.
Yes.
And you know what occurred to me, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's an herbalist about this. When Jesus says she's preparing me for my death, I wonder if part of it is in high doses, it has a sort of like calming effect.
I talked about it.
Yeah.
I actually said it. So she gave it to him the night before he went on his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And that was the last week. They call it the Passion Week.
Yeah.
She gave him a dose from head to toe of that stuff. From the crown of his head to the bottom of his feet.
Did you say that in the sermon?
I did.
I missed that one part.
Yeah,
oh, that's wild.
I said I was thankful that she had given it to him for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
Number one, she had went against everything that she knew because she loved him and wanted to do something special for him. She didn't know that she was preparing him for his burial, but he did.
Yeah.
And so this moment between these two people, it's a precious moment. But if you read all the Gospels, you learn that on the night of that anointing, they called it the anointing of Jesus, from the crown of his head to the soles of his feet, she put this spikenard on him that was incredibly expensive and came most likely from India or China. It was very expensive, very hard to get, but it was used to help people with high levels of stress, disorder, like stress disorders, and with lack of sleep.
Yeah, you listed all kinds of things that particular medicine was used for. But I said
I'm glad that she gave it to him because most likely it calmed him.
Yeah.
Because remember, he's a man. It calmed him, and he was going into his final week, which was going to be high stress. This is where they're ready. They're going to kill him. Within a week, he's dead.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating?
And there was no time from the time he was taken off of the cross to be put in the tomb. There was no time. They had brought all the spices and the stuff for the burial, but it didn't happen. That's why Mary went back early that Sunday morning.
Yeah, because she wanted to finish the process of preparing his body. Right. Yeah. It's so fascinating. So like you bring all that stuff to the table. Golly, I loved that sermon. Yeah. I listened to it when I was at the gym and I was walking with a friend of mine and I had to stop because I was working. And so I had to stop and talk to them. So it's so funny because I must have missed that small piece.
But see, you yourself, I'm glad you missed it because you know what? You used your thought and said, I bet that helped him.
Yeah.
See, that's good.
Yeah.
And that came from an extra biblical source just looking at a village.
Yeah.
And it's not just Brian Capper, the guy that wrote that article. It's in the Temple Scroll. It's there. Go read it. You can actually go and you can go on any of the Dead Sea Scrolls that have been translated. They have a place. There's a website. I don't know it now. I'm sorry. Just Google it. You can go to it. You can see the scroll itself. You can click on it and it'll translate it for you. It's incrable. And you can read it yourself.
I love that. I know that kind of thing is amazing.
And it also taught me one other thing too, which we are going to talk about it, but I'll close my part of it out with this. Bethphage was also one of those cities that was mentioned, and it talked about how Jesus, do you remember whenever Jesus says, go and get this donkey for me? Remember that?
Yeah.
Well, what most people don't realize, in that same temple scroll, it talks about how the Essenes gave things to it. They didn't barter. They just gave it away. All you had to do is tell them what it was for. So he said, if they ask you what it's for, say that the Lord has need of it. The end. That wasn't a miracle. Jesus was just engaging with an Essene crew
Yeah,
that
with a
were there in
community.
Bethphage.
Yeah.
And he was utilizing that. And they were recognizing that. So some people have put miraculous on it, but it wasn't. That's how that community worked. And that's the community that he worked with.
Yeah, well, and see, that's interesting. And he met them where they were, and he spoke the way they needed to be spoken to,
That's
and he
right.
handled, and he operated within their community.
And it fulfilled prophecy, and
Yeah.
he rode this donkey. So if you think about it, that entire group of people were there,
Yeah.
helping one another, and Christ came to them. It was not a vacation villa. They went to work when they got
Yeah.
there. They were taking care of the
Sick people.
They were, and Jesus was bringing his disciples to do just that. That's why the disciples were so angry, is because Mary had used that and taken away all this money. Now, Judas wanted the money. The other disciples were in agreement with him because they were like, yeah, the money could have at least been used for the poor. That's a big waste. But Jesus said, nope, it's not a waste. It was meant for me.
Yeah, she knew what she was doing.
He
She was
brought him
inspired.
there for that purpose. It's incredible, man.
I love it.
I do
Well, I
too.
think that's a wonderful way to end this particular podcast, because this is just like a nice little intro for
like that.
everyone, and just kind of laying some groundwork about what to expect from Notes from the Underground and
Yep.
what to expect from us moving forward.
Yes.
So thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Notes from the Underground.
Peace out, y'all. My mom used to threaten us with the bar soap, but then we graduated into opening your mouth and she would give you a squirt of Dial.
Oh gosh.
It was brutal.
Oh, that's disgusting.
Right
Yeah.
in the mouth. And it went everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was no waiting around for it to hit. It was immediate.
It's like in your mouth all over
Immediately.
the place. That's gross. Yeah, no, I mean, parenting is so different now, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's funny because I find myself battling with my own the parenting skills that I received
Yeah.
a lot at my house. And so we have this really
It's a great
interesting,
mug.
like, yeah. I told you it's Dylan's favorite mug. I have a lot of that struggle. Like I don't want to put soap in their mouth.
Yeah.
I don't even like doing timeout, believe it or not. We have something called Cozy. And if the kid is having a hard time or they're like throwing fits, I'm like, look, I don't want to listen to that, but you're allowed to have those feelings. You need to go into Cozy and get all those feelings out.
Yeah.
And when you're ready to come out and not be throwing this fit anymore because you got all your feelings out, then you go ahead and come out. That's usually how we do it.
Right. Yeah. That's
And
good.
then along comes Jubilee, who's a biter. I have no idea what to do about this because my mom used to be like, well, bite him back. I'm not going to bite my 20-month-old so she knows it hurts. But that's how we used to parent.
That's what my mom did.
That's what my mom
And
did.
guess what? I figured it out really freaking fast.
Yeah.
There's something to it. It's just, it requires the proper amount of restraint. But
Well, and I think you can't do it when you're pissed. I think it's the thing.
because you want to, you don't want to absolutely.
The other thing you can do is say, the next time you want to bite your finger. Bite your finger now. Bite it. And when they bite it and then say, no, bite it hard like you bit me.
Yeah.
And then you feel that pain and they do it to themselves.
Yeah.
That's the other thing.
Yeah, I mean, she bit Aurora so hard she had teeth marks. And
Oh.
so that's when I was like, no. And I picked her up and I put her in the, timeout room. And I was like, no bite, Juba. You sit here until you're ready to not bite. She's 20 months old, no bite. That's all I can, what is her comprehension at this point? But she's also the littlest one. And so she's used to being like, I am here. Damn it.
Yeah.
I am here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hear me roar.
Anyway.
Are we rolling yet, Andy?
You're